Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Jason Meltzer, the VP of Engineering of Creative Markets. How are you doing today? Is it market or markets?
Creative Market, singular.
Okay. So good afternoon, Jason. How are you doing today?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing well. So thank you. So can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Sure. I have what I think would be considered a pretty typical engineering background where I went to school for computer science, thought I was going to be a software engineer for my whole life, worked for a few different companies, both small and large, and then in my particular case, it sort of accidentally fell into leadership roles, starting as an engineering manager, moving into director roles, and then most recently running the entire technical operation for Creative Market, the company that I've been with. It'll be a year later this month.
Oh, cool. And you want to give a plug for your university, your alma mater? Where'd you go?
I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. I did my bachelor's and master's in computer science way back at Arizona State here in town. More recently, I decided that I had never really been formally trained in management, so I decided to pursue another master's degree in what they refer to as management science and engineering. You might also see degrees just called engineering management. That particular master's was from Stanford.
Oh, okay. So a Sun Devil and a Cardinal, right?
I'm both. Yeah, I'm one of the rare ones. I never know what to do when Stanford comes to town for football.
Well, you just root for a tie.
Exactly.
So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as an employee and an employer?
So historically, I had mostly worked with teams that were very distributed, both within the US and certainly internationally in some cases. My last role before this one, I actually worked for American Express for a little while, and they obviously are heavily distributed. But there's a very distinct difference in my mind between distributed and fully remote. So when I joined Creative Market, this was the first time I joined a company that was actually fully remote, pre-COVID, pre any of what we've been dealing with in 2020. Back in, I want to say 2018, the company at that point was very similar to many other companies that you see, where they had an office in the Bay Area, but more and more they were hiring remote employees. And so they were dealing with kind of this bifurcated culture where you have some people in the office that are not happy about it, some people that are not in the office that are also not happy about it. And so they made the decision to just go fully remote, give up their office, and have the entire team be distributed. And so I had the fortunate situation last fall when I joined the company having already gone through a lot of those pains of that transition and sort of figuring out how to really operate as a distributed remote company, much as I'm sure many companies are doing over the last 5 or 6 months.
So are the majority of your engineers in your department, are they all over the country or the world, or are they located like generally around the Phoenix area?
Actually not in the Phoenix area. So we do, for the time being, we exclusively hire in the US. We actually somewhat recently were able to set up our benefits in such a way that we can go across all 48 states. The only reason we leave out Alaska and Hawaii is just for time zone purposes. We really like being able to have some cohesion and when people are available. But we have pockets of engineers that we happen to have found in a couple of locations. We have a bunch in Texas, a few in Denver. That's not necessarily by design. That's just sort of where we have found talent. And of course, in some cases, that's because we have found people who then bring along, their friends and former colleagues once they join and are enjoying their job.
Yeah, and it's very common. And it's actually a better way to do it too, that they can communicate with each other in general. So very good.
Yeah, I mean, I try very hard to purposely avoid setting up project teams that are exclusively co-located in one place, because that's really not the way that we operate. So we've had occasions where we've got 3 guys in Denver, and once in a while they'll end up working on a project together, and it's up to them whether they want to get together at a coffee shop once in a while and work together. We certainly don't stop it. But what I try to be careful of is if they're working on a project together and there's another person in Ohio or Texas or wherever we have people, I don't want that person to be left out. So predominantly we actually try to avoid those situations.
Yeah, like take a DBA, then you have 1 or 2 of them, and they generally help all projects, I would assume.
Exactly.
So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
Well, I've learned a lot about how purposeful you have to be in the design of your team and your culture joining this company over the last year, and seeing what has worked and what I could think back and think about what would not have worked at other organizations I've been in the past. And granted, COVID again has sort of forced this issue with many companies, and I can't necessarily say whether it's working for those companies that were forced into it or not. But in terms of the future of remote work, I think if companies want to continue this post-COVID, they're going to have to be more deliberate than just saying, oh, well, we've got Slack and we've got Zoom, we've solved the technology problem, off we go. I think that's sort of the mentality people go into it with, and think, oh, we've got all the technology, that should be sufficient. But in actuality, it affects the way that we hire people, it affects the way we onboard, it affects the way we conduct meetings, it affects the type of people that we hire. And so there's a lot of things built into our culture around how we conduct meetings, as I said, how we think about the kind of person that fits our culture, and even how we operate our day. So a good example of that, I mentioned that we try to keep people within the 48 states, mostly for time zone reasons. We operate on a model of you work core hours for your time zone. So if you're on the East Coast, we don't expect you to be on at 8, 9 o'clock at night just because I happen to be on Pacific time and I might need to get a hold of you. What we do ask is that you be super communicative about what your hours are. If you go to lunch, put it in Slack, put things on the calendar. You have to be sort of more proactive than you might have to be in an office where you can just see that somebody's not at their desk and figure you'll run into them later. So with that all said, we also ask people to really be deliberate about having a dedicated desk. In my case, I have an office. That's great. We don't expect everybody to have that. But what we don't want is somebody laying on their couch with their video off on their laptop, still in their pajamas. Like, most of our team gets up in the morning, takes a shower, goes to whatever the place is where they do their work, and acts as if they're going to an office. And that sounds like a really minor point, but it actually makes a huge difference in just the way we communicate, where when we have meetings, everybody has their video on by default. I'm sure many people listening to this have experienced that thing where somebody's working from home for the day and I'm just going to leave my video off for this meeting, and they're not as engaged. The people interacting with them are not as engaged either.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even notice that they're there, to be honest with you, right? Unless you happen to look at the participants, but how often do you do that?
Right.
So what is the story behind Creative Market? What is your product? Who's your target audience? All that stuff.
So Creative Market has sort of a long and winding history. We've been around for something in the order of 8 or 9 years. Started out of an incubator in the Bay Area. The notion of what the company does is it's a two-sided marketplace specifically for designers and for design assets. So if you think about eBay, if you think about Etsy, that's where people are selling physical goods. We are the equivalent, but for digital goods, specifically targeted at designers. So think things like fonts, templates, graphics, photos, things of that nature. And so we've got a pretty substantial population of tens of thousands of designers selling their assets, and then millions of people that are buying those assets for a number of different purposes. Sometimes it's as simple as personal projects. We've certainly seen more of that as people have been stuck at home over the last few months. But more often it's other designers who are maybe doing client work and want to accelerate their work by utilizing somebody else's template and having a license to that, rather than having to do the entire work from scratch. So you can think of it, at least in some cases, as almost a raw good. That's probably not a fair assessment of everything that we sell, but it really does accelerate a designer's work for their own client base.
So would it be kind of like if a web builder would subscribe to your service to go get specific fonts, graphics, all that kind of stuff?
Exactly. Yeah. Like that would be a common, at least one of the common cases we see, is somebody who is constantly doing custom work and, needs a photo for a particular thing, or needs a font to finish out their design, things of that nature.
Yeah. Very interesting. You said you have millions of people that are subscribed?
So it's not a subscription business today. It's a transactional business. So we have some clients who come back to us again and again and again. We have other people who find us via search engine or what have you and make a single purchase. There's sort of a wide range, but we do make millions of transactions a month.
Wow, that's really cool. So how did you incorporate the idea of remote at your company? It sounded like you joined it as it was fully remote, but before you, was that what went into that decision to be a fully remote company, and how did they do that?
Yeah, so as I said, I think that it was not a linear process. What happened was that more and more, the company was in the Bay Area, competing for talent, finding that they were strategically hiring, sometimes in the Bay Area, sometimes outside of it. And so what they observed was that two cultures were emerging. The
Mm,
people that were in the office, would benefit from that cohesion that comes from being in an office. Some of the more minor perks, whether it's free food or what have you, that would get on the nerves of the people that were not in the office. But then the people that were not in the office had a level of flexibility that the people in the office were jealous of. And so, while I can't speak to all the motivations for why the decision was made, I can say that ultimately the leaders of the company at that time, including my CEO, said, we really have to go all in on one of these models. And for us, for what we're trying to build, having this remote team just makes a lot more sense.
yeah, it's a lot easier to go remote than to move everybody to the Bay Area.
Exactly. And it opened up a talent pool that we really benefit from. I mean, to be honest with you, we do still have a few team members in the Bay Area. We don't necessarily avoid hiring the Bay Area, but more often than not, we end up hiring elsewhere. Every hire we've made in my time with the company has not been in the Bay
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that has a lot to do with the salaries of the Bay Area.
Area. Exactly. It doesn't, as I wouldn't call us a startup at this point, but as a smaller company, it just doesn't make sense for us to limit ourselves in that.
Yeah, I understand. So, and speaking, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the pandemic. It forced everybody to go remote in early to mid May. You already were remote, but did that cause any roadblocks or challenges for you or for your customers that you didn't expect?
Well, we certainly saw an impact to the business in the short term, right around March when things were really getting bad. Although since then we have, recovered and are doing pretty well. Um, in terms of the impact of the team, what was interesting is that overall, I would say no. We were already well set up for this. We already knew how to operate remotely. The only downside for us is that we do try to get the team all together in person twice a year.
Hmm.
I joined the company in September. Fortunately, our next planned one happened to be this past January, so we got together in San Diego for several days. And I think, by the way, that that's an important thing to do when you have an all-remote team, whether it's once a year, twice a year, or just strategically when you have sort of more brainstormy, creative kind of work that requires having people in a room. It's
Mhm.
hard to do a Zoom meeting all day long. So nevertheless, we did do that in January. I got to meet almost the entire team at that time. And so the only impact for us has been that we probably would have been doing another one right around now, August,
Mm.
September timeframe. And now we don't have that ability to do that.
Yeah, and just the nature of your product offering and your customer base, it seems like remote, it wouldn't have a big effect on you.
Yeah, I think the only effect that we can at least presume exists is that there's not as much contract design work out there. At least there wasn't. So if you think about in-person events that are not happening, there may have historically been some amount of design work associated with those events, whether they're concerts or conferences or what have you. However, as I said, our business has recovered, and I think part of that is due to some smart moves that we've made, and part of it has been that business has just moved elsewhere. So while in-person events are not happening, there have been alternative things happening. And so from what we can observe, there is still design work out there. People are still, doing projects. And if anything, we accelerate that work. And so there may be even more impetus to use our service and to look at our assets when you're trying to just hustle and get that work out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting because I think now that we're 6 months into it, I think people have the general flow and see, people are starting to see, okay, now this is what's really how it's going to work, and now business is starting to move forward again.
Yeah.
So, well, finally, there are companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products for startups similar to yourself. How important do you think that will be going forward for you as like a VP of engineering that needs to hire very good talent, and you need to hire it in a hurry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on how well set up you are for this kind of environment. So, as I mentioned before, you have to think about how you look for the right talent, how you hire them, how you onboard them. These are very deliberate actions you have to take. So what I have found is that what ends up being, I mean, this is true to every team, but it's particularly true for our situation. We need to hire very good communicators.
Mhm.
I have never worked with a team of engineers before who are such good communicators in multiple forms: email, Slack, verbally, over
Mhm.
Zoom, what have you. Uh, I joke that in the past I've worked with engineers who it was very difficult to get them to write in full sentences, and that is not true in my current team. And I don't think that's by accident. I mean, I happen to inherit a lot of the team, but we have continued that trend because I think it's built into our interview practice.
Mhm.
Again, similarly with onboarding, historically, what we have done is have the manager actually fly out for a couple of days to the location of the new employee to just sort of work alongside them the first couple of days. Now, again, we've had to sort of change our practices over the last few months as we've hired people, but we will return to that practice at some point. And then also setting up mentorships and other things that might just come naturally if you're in an office environment, but we don't have the benefit of that. As far as Gaper goes, I think that you have to sort of observe what the team's strengths and weaknesses are. So whether it's communication, whether it's onboarding, whether it's just the daily practice of communicating and getting work done, I think that that's where you have to really evaluate whether these platforms are going to help you in those areas. Because as I said before, just setting up the technologies and assuming the team will adapt just doesn't work. And so if you have the right people who, by the way, on top of everything else I said, are also highly motivated, they're sort of self-managing in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean that we're not responsible for guiding their careers, but it does mean that we have an expectation that you can be responsible to get your work done and don't need sort of the hovering boss over your shoulder. That obviously does not work in this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with, I was a VP of engineering myself, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I had certain guys that, people told them what was needed. We'd go in, we'd do a whiteboard session, and they'll say, okay, I'll have this in a month, and boom. And there were others you just had to almost every day talk to them, right?
And the thing is, everybody says they want to hire those people, but the reality is that not every individual that's self-motivated like that necessarily fits every company. There may be other cultural nuances that you have to anticipate with hiring individuals like that, where maybe they are motivated by very different things. And so if you're not able to provide those things, they're not going to last very long. So it's not just to say, I want to hire motivated people. That's an obvious statement that everybody would say, but it's, I want to hire somebody who's motivated, who communicates well, who's motivated by the kind of work we're doing, and also is going to be understanding of the trade-offs of working at a small company. We can't invest in every single technology that we want to. We have to make hard trade-offs between new features and tech debt. We have been around for a while. We have tech debt. That's not for everybody.
Right. Yes, I know what you mean. So, well, Jason, it was nice talking to a fellow VP of engineering, and it was very informative. I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
And have a great day.
You too.
Bye.